actually a doctor. Cliff asked how an orthopedic surgeon could get involved in healthcare reform. So I guess that's my story, and I'm not a status quo guy, as you will find out. My story begins, I was born and raised in Juneau in 1962. And back when I grew up, the state had more money coming in than we knew what to do with. My dad was the state attorney general under Governor Jay Hammond for 7 years. And I remember as a teenager going duck hunting with Jay and my dad on our boat for a 3 or 4 day duck hunting trip where they sat around talking about formation of the permanent fund for the majority of the trip. So they were different days back then. And I loved hunting and fishing. I grew up spending a lot of time in the outdoors. Through some friends that I met through competitive swimming in Petersburg, I gravitated into commercial fishing, and I started fishing when I was 15. And over the next 8 summers, I fished throughout the state, Bristol Bay, Gulf of Alaska, Southeast, and a number of different fisheries. I owned 2 different commercial fishing boats of my own, and I ended up fishing for 4 months off the northern shore of Norway for cod when I took a year off after high school. And I talk about my commercial fishing days because it made a big impression on me as far as the value of a hard day's work. And I also learned that I liked to use my hands, and I was good with using my hands. And because I liked working with people and helping people, I chose to go into healthcare. So I put myself through college and medical school. I went through the WWAMI program, University of Washington. I met my wife, Monica, in Seattle. She's also a physician. And we did our residencies in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan. She's a pediatrician. And when we finished, we came back to Alaska, or I came back to Alaska. She wasn't from here. But it was always very important for me to come home. And I looked around at other parts of the state seriously, but I ended up returning back to Juneau and practiced there. When I came back to Juneau, at first I practiced in solo private practice for 8 years in a practice administered by myself. And things got very, very busy, and it was sort of a now or never moment with my family, and we chose to take a 2-year sailing sabbatical. We sailed from Juneau to Auckland, New Zealand, and then back to Juneau. And along the course of the trip, I did a small sports medicine fellowship in Auckland, and I participated in and experienced a number of international healthcare systems along the way. When I got back to Juneau, I went back into solo private practice for 2 years, but this time in a practice administered by the hospital rather than by myself. And then I became the lead organizer and force behind the organization of Juneau Bone and Joint Center, which is a 5-person orthopedic surgeon subspecialty group in Juneau. We had X-ray, MRI, physical therapy, and now a small surgery center. And Juneau Bone and Joint Center was and still is a monopoly, not unlike a number of healthcare facilities up here in Anchorage. Anyway, I worked there for 9 years. I was elected its president in its first year when we formed the corporation, and then after that it became a rotating position. And in 2013, I decided to change gears, and I became a part-time employee of Petersburg Medical Center, which is a hospital in Petersburg. For those of you that aren't familiar with Petersburg, it's a community of about 3,000 people, primarily a commercial fishing town south of Juneau. When I first came back to Juneau, I was understandably concerned that there wouldn't be enough business for a new person to come back to town. And I was on good terms with the other physicians in town, and I was getting ready to scrub on an operation, and one of my senior colleagues was with me, and I asked him, is there room for another guy here? And he smiled and he put his arm on my shoulder and he said, son, this here's the golden goose. You're gonna be just fine. And of course he was right, it was and still is. And as the months went by, and remember I was administering my own practice at that time, so I was seeing everything. And as the checks and the EOB started coming in, and I realized that I was being paid 3 to 5 times the national average of my colleagues that were equally trained, I became very interested in healthcare economics and trying to understand why there was such a massive discrepancy between what we were paid here versus down south. And I ran into a senior billing manager that I'd known for many years. She didn't work for me. And I said, how can this be? What's behind this? And she said, I don't know, but there's a ton of money on the table and you'd be a fool not to take it. Everyone else is. And so that's what we've all been doing up here, really. And let me just say that the vast majority of the doctors that I've met in Alaska and elsewhere, and other healthcare professionals at hospitals, are really good people. And I would say the majority of us went into healthcare for the right reasons. I certainly did. I wanted to help people, and I wanted to come home and share that with people I grew up with. But I think that we all know that money has a tendency to corrupt, and there's been a lot of money on the table. And in my opinion, it's a system that's corrupt, not the people. And it's a system that needs to be changed. And as time went by, I became progressively disillusioned with the way we deliver healthcare in Alaska and in the country, partly because of my experiences in other places. And I saw a great deal of greed and envy. I saw a lot of backstabbing and infighting. I saw excessive self-referral, overutilization. And it got to the point where I really wasn't enjoying practicing orthopedic surgery the way I was doing it anymore. And so I decided to make a change. So Monica and I went back to school, and we went to UCLA. She had other interests, but mine were primarily healthcare economics, and we both got master's degrees in public health in 2013 and 2014. And this is after I'd become an employee of Petersburg Hospital. So I commuted back and forth between Southern California and Petersburg to work. And when we finished the program, we moved back to Petersburg. And since then, in addition to working part-time at Petersburg Medical Center, I work about 6 weeks there a year doing clinics and surgery. I also volunteer internationally at a pediatric children's orthopedic hospital in Phnom Penh, Cambodia once a year, and it's been an amazing experience. And because once it gets in your blood, it's kind of hard to shake. I got back into commercial fishing in 2013, and I own a 40-foot gill netter and fish Southeast Alaska for salmon with one or more of my family members in the summer. And then, of course, I've gotten into healthcare reform. And in addition to being part of these Alaska Common Ground talks, I'm also on the Alaska State Medicaid Commission for Cost and Quality. Some of you may know me as an outspoken advocate for a single payer system in Alaska or national. And while I was fishing this summer, I was approached by a number of individuals who asked me to become the campaign chairman and lead spokesperson for the 2 Alaska healthcare ballot initiatives that are currently circulating around the state with obtaining the signatures. You know, I think Alaska is in a severe fiscal crisis right now. I think we all know that. I thought it was 2.5 billion, but I guess it's 3.2 billion now. It's a deficit that our legislature can't make up. Small businesses really don't want to add new employees because of the tremendous cost, and new businesses will avoid the state at all costs because we have by far the highest healthcare premiums in the world. You all probably heard about Amazon looking for new headquarters, and there's no way they'd ever move to Alaska because of the healthcare costs. You know, I think some of you may consider me a hypocrite for having profited off the system, and I certainly did, but I didn't come to Alaska for that reason. And to be honest, I didn't understand the healthcare economics at all when I came back here. What was important to me was coming back to Alaska and raising my family here, providing care for people that I grew up with. And more than anything, I want my kids and their kids to have the same opportunities that I had growing up in Alaska. And I truly believe that Alaska is not going to be able to pull out of its economic tailspin until we can figure out how to contain the prices of healthcare in Alaska. And for me, it came down to a decision of wanting to be part of the solution rather than perpetuating the problem. So that's how I got involved with healthcare reform. Thank you.